Cactus Vella, thank you for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
First off, congratulations on the new band, the new EP. It's fabulous. I was blasting it on the way home from work today, just on repeat. It's terrific. So, tell us a little bit about the band, how this project came together.
Sure. It was back in just around the end of winter. It was March, and I got booked to play a gig at a barbershop here in Toronto. There's this barbershop, Rod's Gun and Barbers, and they do gigs on the weekends. And they asked me to come play, and I was gonna just treat it like another solo gig. And then I decided I wanted a little accompaniment with me on stage. So I made a couple of calls to some friends who I've been meaning to jam with. I wanted to make music with these guys for a long time. And we put together a couple of sets and we went and banged them out. And oddly enough, it was like a blizzard the night we played. It was like freaking, it was like 3 feet of snow. It was ridiculous, right? But we played, we had a lot of fun, and we decided to stick together. And so, yeah, we became Public Mess.
That's great. And what's the story behind the name?
Oh, well, we were juggling a few names around, and it was not a great story. I was driving down the street with my family, and we noticed some dude just freaking doing home repairs, but instead of doing them like in his driveway or in his own property, he dragged out a big workbench and all these extension cords, and he was like cutting wood on the sidewalk and making this giant mess, and made a joke about a public mess, and I was like, "Oh, that's a good fucking name right there."
It is. Yeah, that's right. It's
So,
funny how those things happen. It just out of nowhere and kind of the run of the mill things going on during your day, right?
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the EP. So how long have you been writing songs? How long has the process taken from start to finish to get this released?
Oh, it went really fast. If anything, I'd slowed it down just because it went rather fast. I wrote as soon as I started jamming with these guys, I got really inspired. So I think I wrote "They Bring Me Woes" and "The Tide" like in like a couple of days, and then finished "Never Get Sober," and like it came together really fast. And then we went and spent a weekend up at my cottage, and I have a studio in the garage, and we recorded that, which was a blast. And then I think I spent the most time mixing it.
Mm-hmm.
I probably that was probably like version 20 or 30 of the mix. Like I just kept on tweaking it forever.
Right.
And then eventually I just had to wipe my hands of it. I sent it off to get mastered with John Drew, and then I had it already, and I've been working on the artwork for the whole time I was mixing it. And then it was just picked a release date with enough time to, like, you want to give yourself a little bit of time for people to want to do some press on it. Right. So yeah,
That's great.
it happened pretty fast.
That's terrific. And it's, like I said, I absolutely love it. And you mentioned a couple of the songs. The two songs that you mentioned first are my two favorites.
Nice.
They Bring Me Woes, and of course, The Tide is also. And it's funny, when I put it on Spotify, had it shuffle it, it played the songs in the exact order of preference. So it's like, that's that's something there.
That is something.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit. So Cactus Vella, obviously, to me anyway, a very unique voice in the genre. Where did not only your passion, but who are your influences in this genre of music that sort of sunk into you the most?
In terms of like the acoustic punk thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I don't think I started with influences, because when I started doing the acoustic punk thing, there wasn't many people around doing it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, like goes back to the late '90s, and I think it was like around '97, and I was playing in a band called Bomb Shelter, and like a hardcore band, and I started and me and the other guitar player in the band, Jason, would always just mess around with our acoustics, and we'd do like, just show up at parties and do acoustic sets and stuff like that. But then I started taking gigs, and when I started doing gigs in Toronto, there was no one else doing acoustic punk to play with. So it was like the shows I'd either get put on these punk rock shows, where it would be like, 4 or 5 punk rock bands with me sandwiched in the middle, and it didn't
Right.
always go over super well.
Right.
Or else I'd get put on these shows that I can only describe as like Island of the Misfits toys. It was just like the random weirdos, and we all got
Right.
stuck together. It was me. It was a guy named Corpus who's still around, who was doing like this synth thing, and there was a guy named Johnny Sizzle around. He was doing like some acoustic stuff, but it wasn't like, I wouldn't call it punk, right? So it was strange, and this was like, this was years before. This was a few years before I remember like ever hearing of Against Me or anything like that. So I mean, the only acoustic punk rock things I knew were like Husker Du had some acoustic stuff, and Leatherface, who are very dear to me, had some acoustic stuff, and like I remember hearing like a Bad Religion acoustic song, but it wasn't, and then the Violent Femmes, obviously,
Yeah. Right.
and like, then there was other things that touched on it, but yeah, it was. So I don't know. I was drawn to inspiration. I was like doing like, what if Leatherface and Neil Young were hanging out? Like
Right.
I don't even know.
Right.
I don't even know what you'd call it. I have no idea. And plus a lot of times we think like musicians would tell you what they're inspired by, but you might scratch your head half the time going like, I don't hear it.
You're right. Right.
Like that's a thing, right? Like we
Right.
don't always sound like our influences.
Right. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So going back to since you answered that question so eloquently, what about other influences, local influences? I know Toronto has and had a booming punk scene. Um, who were you following in those days? What do you remember from back in that scene?
Oh man, yeah. When I first started getting into the Toronto scene, it took a little while to find bands that I connected with. Like the first bunch of bands that I discovered in Toronto were a little more on the crustier side. And that was cool. Like I was digging it.
Right.
I remember hearing random killing and the goofs, and I was like, oh yeah, this is rad. But then it was the first bands that hit me that I was like, yeah, this feels right. Was the Blundermen, Hockey Teeth, One Blood. A little bit later on, the Satanatras. These were bands that really spoke to me and who I embraced. And they sounded a lot like the American bands I was listening to at the time.
Right.
A little more melodic.
So were you already playing and writing music at that time, or did that inspire you to start?
I was playing and writing, but I wasn't gigging yet.
Right.
So I had my like high school bands and stuff like that, and I got on stage for the first time in late '93 or early '94 with my first punk rock band that I gigged with. We're called Rejected, and we lasted about a year or so, but we probably played like 20 times in that year just in Toronto alone. I think
Right.
we hit the road once. We went and played Hamilton, and that was,
oh wow, road trip.
Yeah, and it was such a big deal for us. There was a band, if you remember, the Problem Children, and they were older than us, and I really loved them, and they saw us play in Toronto one night and got a hold of me and said like, we'd like to take you out of town with us.
Oh, wow.
So, and that was it was a pretty big deal.
For sure. So speaking of, I wanted to show you something. I just thought of this before. So I was in a record store in Aurelia.
Okay.
There's a great record store, Alley Cat Music in Aurelia.
Right.
And I picked this up for like, I think it was like $15. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's a Toronto hardcore compilation called Toronto's Burning.
Okay, can you lower it? Go lower a bit. Okay. Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. That looks familiar.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering. Obviously, you're not going to be able to see some. I'll read out some of the bands to you. So Black Spokes, Madmen, Black Spokes, Madmen, Living Darkness, UTI, Urban Blight, The Reprobates, Danger Loves, Rammer, Hazardous Waste, and School Jerks.
Okay. So that's what, early 2000s.
Yes.
Yeah, well, Rammer's a metal band, right?
Yeah.
School Jerks, I remember that name. A lot of those bands I don't recall.
Yeah. That's wild, because I thought like
it's still a good score.
It is a good score. It was good because I'm not one to especially at the price of vinyl these days. Take a chance but I thought, Toronto's burning, and I read some of the band names. I was like, okay, this has got to be all right. So,
what's the label on it?
Schizophrenic Records.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that goes to show you how deep our scene can get, right? Like, so if that was the early 2000s, and like I was, with little exaggeration, I was out 6 nights a week for from the late 90s, from 99 to like 2010. I was out every night at a gig, and I hardly recognize any of those band names.
Right. Yeah.
So
like you said, shows the depth of the scene.
Thank you. Exactly.
Sure.
It does.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. It's good. I've ran through it a couple of times. It's, it's quite heavy.
Yes.
I quite like, but yeah, it was an interesting find. And it takes me back to the days of, I'm going to get to Leatherface in a minute, but just flipping through bins of records and not knowing what you're going to find. Like, there's something so visceral about that experience. And it can't be beat by any convenience that digital offers.
Yes, exactly. And it's so hard to do it these days because records are so expensive, like you said. But I mean, some of I can name I can look at a record and it could bring me back. I'm like, oh, I remember where I was when I bought that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And and then like even buying records by bands like pre-internet, buying records by bands that you never heard of, but merely because they were on the same record label as a band that you liked. Like, that meant something, and you could trust it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, what you just said is so true. Cause I remember, one of my favorite bands, punk bands, is Forgotten Rebels. I love the Forgotten Rebels.
Yeah.
And, I was with some buddies. I was probably 19, I guess, at the time, in a record store, flipping through, was cassettes then. And seeing this, I had no idea who they were. I was just getting more into punk then anyway. I thought, okay, Forgotten Rebels, the name's pretty cool. And then you flip it over and the songs are called Fuck Me Dead and Elvis is Dead and, Surfing on Heroin. It's like, okay, this is not top 40. So
no, it's not.
Yeah. So, you buy it at cassettes like $9 or $10 then, or whatever it was. You take a shot at it, and it's still one of my favorite albums of all time. So just that experience is something that you can't replicate, go into your Spotify playlist.
Yeah, exactly.
So, getting the Leatherface, you mentioned to me that Leatherface is it your favorite band? One of your favorite bands for sure?
Yeah, it's easy to call them my favorite.
Yeah. So, do you remember Record Peddler?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, one of the greatest record stores. So I'm 21, I think, by this time, and I was living down in Toronto for a while, moved there from up north. I'm back up north now, actually. So in the big city, and find this record store, and the song is playing, and I'm really digging it, but I'm, poor as fuck at the time. I can't even buy a cassette at that point.
Right.
So I asked the guy working, like, who is this? Like, and he told me. Okay, but that's the days. Obviously, you don't have a cell phone to make a note, right? And so I thought, I'm repeating it on the way home, and of course I forget about it. So over the years go by, I'm thinking, who the fuck was that? Who was that? What was that? So, and all I could remember was the chorus, a couple of lines of the chorus. So eventually the internet comes along, and I can start searching, typing in the lyrics that I do know.
Right.
Eventually it leads me to Leatherface, basically. I thought, okay, that's familiar, because I was thinking metal face, I sort of had that's got to be. So I go on to Napster or Bear Share or LimeWire, whatever the hell it was at the time, and start downloading Leatherface songs, every one. And the song was Not Superstitious.
Ah, nice.
Which to this day is still one of my favorite songs. And find it, I kid you not, I was almost had tears in my eyes when I found that song and heard that song again. it was like a quest had been fulfilled.
Oh, that's a great story. I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing how
that.
music just hits you and sticks with you for forever, basically.
Yeah.
So you mentioned going back to an earlier part of the conversation. You mentioned the album artwork. That's something that you did. You created all the artwork and everything for the album.
Yeah. And it was a bit of an experiment. I'm a graphic designer. That's my profession.
Okay.
And I took a stab at seeing what I can do with AI, because AI's, it's very out there right now. It's very happening, and as graphic designers, I think we should embrace it, not be threatened by it or worried about it. It's never going to replace us, right? So I just mess around. So that's a combination of AI on multiple levels, and then photoshopping, and it's a whole bunch of things going on there to get to that point.
Right. So you're a graphic designer by trade. That's your quote day job.
Yeah, that's what pays for my house. Yeah.
Yeah. So what? Obviously, music and graphic artists are two creative pursuits in different areas. What are the similarities for you? What similarities do you see in those creative processes from, let's say, the start of a project, be it an album or a graphics art project? What are the similarities there?
Creating something from nothing, like something from nothing, in the sense of, sometimes when we write songs as musicians, sometimes there is an idea. There's a lingering idea. There's inspiration, whether it was based around a lyric or a concept. And then sometimes it just happens. Some of the best songs in the world have been written because somebody was just sitting there with their guitar noodling, right? And again, as guitar players, we noodle all the time. You pick up your guitar and you just start playing something, and there's always going to be someone next to you going, "What's that?" And it's like, it's nothing, man. I'm just warming up, like, right? So there's some people who jump all over those warm-ups and turn them into everything. Sometimes they become songs, sometimes they don't. With design, if you really love graphic design, if you really love being a visual artist, you're not just doing the work that's assigned to you. You're just always creating. So I'll sit down in front of Photoshop or in front of Illustrator for no reason. Instead of watching TV or instead of reading a book, whatever it is, I'll just sit down and open up the Adobe suite, and just start dropping things on a template, like words, shapes, colors, pictures, altering stuff. And then sometimes it's nothing. And sometimes I'm like, oh, this is good. And I just, I put it away for a while, and then a couple months later or something, it comes back to me, and like, I could use this for a poster or a t-shirt design or whatever it is. So again, it's creating something from nothing. It's starting with an idea or a blank slate, and just all of a sudden, whatever, you have a great song or a great design.
Right. And that's the graphic artist version of noodling, sitting down.
That's right. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So there, I was wondering what the process is like and so on, but it seems like there are actually a few similarities there. That's pretty
definitely
cool. Pretty cool. And so back to the EP, wanted to ask a couple of things about it. One of the things that I love about pretty much like everything that you do is the imagery in both the music and the lyrics. You paint a picture, and that's one of the things that draws me to certain music is that sort of imagery, the painting of a picture. So I think that's really cool. So tell us there's a couple of stories, obviously a story in every song, but Leaving Parkdale, what's the story behind that?
that one there's not much to. It's just a love letter to the neighborhood,
Right.
Oddly enough, everyone in the band has lived in Parkdale at one point or another. Rob, the bassist, still lives there. I lived in Parkdale for years, for like a couple of decades, and it's just it's true Toronto. It's it's like, and it's one of those neighborhoods where it's like you have, because of where we're at now as a city, and because of like increased cost of living and gourmet restaurants popping up in the weirdest places. So Parkdale, like you'll have like a lineup for the food bank next to a giant lineup for $30 tacos. You know, it's just such
Right.
a weird mix, and but Parkdale's gritty and scary and beautiful and sweet, and at the same time, everyone looks out for each other. When I was really young, in my teen years, and I would just come down to Toronto, whether it was with a group of friends to see a gig or by myself, I would always wander into Parkdale, and it was like it felt so like it felt wrong. It felt seedy and dirty and like and risky, and it was always like, why is there always fog in Parkdale? Like it was like clear skies everywhere else, but you get to Parkdale, and all of a sudden like the sun went down and it was foggy and like smoky.
Right.
And yeah, so I've just always loved Parkdale. So it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of song. Like I wrote the roots of it and the core of it several years ago when I left Parkdale.
Right.
And it was just a bit of a joke, and then we embraced it as a band and ran with it.
That's great. That's great. And I think to me, the most interesting story, I would think, and maybe obviously you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but Never Get Sober is quite sounds like quite the character that song is written about.
Yeah. So an old friend of mine, JJ, and we played in JJ was awesome. JJ, even back before I moved to Toronto, when I was playing in a band called Bomb Shelter, as I mentioned, and we were more York region based, right? And we were gigging in Toronto, obviously, and JJ was playing in a little up and coming band called Two Pump Louie, and they would open up for us a lot. They were the band that we'd always stick on the opening spot, and they did well for themselves. And he was just a friend of mine. And then like I would couch surf. I would like stay at his house. He had a punk house in Toronto, and I'd stay there for like a week or two, and then go back home to, just to get my shit together and clean up. And then
where was home at this time for you?
I was living in Vaughan.
Okay.
And JJ had a punk house at it was actually 1 Federal Street, which was Dundas and Dufferin. It was the end of a dead end street, oddly enough. And then eventually he was like, just Cactus, just move in. There's a little room in the basement you can take for $200 a month. And I didn't have a job, but I was like, I can afford that. So I just I moved in and I just busked. I was busking at the liquor store every night and just doing odd work. And I managed to make my rent pretty easily. And so yeah, JJ was just like, JJ got me my first home in Toronto. Then he got me my first job. He took me to my first booze cans, like after hours. He just like he was a good dude, and like he exposed me to a lot of things that I was gonna find anyways. But and he lived pretty fast, and then he got himself in a lot of trouble and had to leave the city. And then we'd always hear about things he got up to. He was just getting up to a lot of trouble everywhere he went, unfortunately. And then he eventually, sadly passed away a year ago. And it was heartbreaking for a lot of us, because a lot of us lost touch with him because he was just in such a fucked up place. Right. So he passed away. Someone I know, a mutual friend, suggested I write a song about him. And I was like, yeah, I'll call it Never Get Sober. Right. And then I was like, I sat down with the guitar and it wrote itself. No word of a lie. It wrote itself in like a minute. And then I remember looking at the lyrics going like, these are fucking basic. Like these lyrics are like basic. They're not very there's no depth to them really. They are what they are.
Right.
And then I was like, you know what though? Like that suits him. And it's like nothing in that song is a slag at him. Nothing is an insult at him. It's more of a reflection of who we all were at that time. And I love him and miss him dearly. Mm-hmm. But it's just an honest song. And I'm pretty proud of it.
Oh, it's great. It's so catchy. And the one thing I've noticed, and I don't know if this was intentional or just how the songs came out, but the songs all, mostly have a very kind of serious undertone to them. Mm-hmm. They Bring Me Woes, for example. But at the same time, they're so upbeat.
Yeah.
And was that intentional, or is that just how the songs manifested themselves?
I'd love to say it's by design. but it's also just I can't even avoid it sometimes. We all, again, like I said, the way we sometimes we don't sound like our influences. There's also things about us as musicians that you just can't control sometimes. And I've always been told I write upbeat, and I know I do. But yeah, definitely, there's a darker, serious tone to this album. Um, That's why it's called Too Many Ghosts. Like there is a bit of a darkness to it. It's not a. It's not. I guess. Well, maybe darkness or just acceptance of shit, right? You
Mm-hmm.
know. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I could write a full on downer sounding like musically. I don't think it's in my blood to do it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Like if you
So,
were, if you were to read the lyrics separately, you would
right.
think, holy crap. And then you listen to the songs, and like I said, they're upbeat, and you're, bopping around singing them at the top of your lungs. And it's a happy, sad song, like in a lot of ways.
Right. And I think that's where the Leatherface influence comes in too, because I wouldn't call Leatherface happy, but like even a song like Not Superstitious, which you mentioned, it's got some of the most beautiful lyrics ever written.
I
But
know.
it's upbeat and it's in a major key, and it's, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You change the lyrics to something like, a little more rainbow and sunshine and you have a pop song.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. So again, congratulations. It's fabulous. I play
Thank
it,
you.
many times each week. So it's terrific. Um, so you've already mentioned off the top of my head 2 or 3 other bands that you've been involved in. It sounds like there's a fair roster of them. So just talk a little bit about some of the bands you've been in, and what you remember of them and what was special about each one.
Okay, yeah. Well, like I said, yeah, Rejected was my first one, and Bomb Shelter came right after that, and that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. That was quick and fast. And then that band that JJ was in, I told you about, Two Pump Louie. I lived with them and just kind of helped them. I like roadied for them sometimes. I helped them with some songwriting. Like I remember writing some bass lines for JJ and even a couple of guitar hooks, and then produced their album. And then eventually they asked me to join on second guitar. And so I did that for a while. And then when that ended, started sinking ships, which a lot of people probably know me for or did know me for, because I was in that band for we did it for 10, 11 years. And sinking ships was interesting because that was like, at that point in my life, I walked away from my career. I had a career going in the television and film industry.
Mm.
And I was like, I'm like, I remember being like, I'm going to start my next band, and this will be the band that I give the most of myself to ever in my life. I'm like, I have a vision, I have a sound, I have all these things that I want to try to do with the band, all the things that I love about music, and all the elements of my favorite bands, and what I know I have in me, and the things that I'm willing to learn. And I wanted to start my ideal band, and almost right off the bat it was doomed because the person that I started it with, and like we just had slightly different visions right away, and some of the people that we were suggesting to bring in were just like more hobby players, and I was like, I want to give this a shot. Like, not
Mm-hmm.
talking fame or fortune or selling out or mainstream or any of that stuff. I'm just talking about like, I want to record and release music regularly, and I want to tour regularly, and I just want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I didn't care what the end result was. I just wanted to do it, and do it the way I wanted to do it, and with people that felt the same way I felt.
Right.
And 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 uh and so at the end of the day, Sinking Ships was something that was just some of the most amazing times and some of the best things ever in my life, and absolutely some of the worst things ever,
Mm-hmm.
because it just like, even though I was writing like 95% of the music, it still at the end of the day didn't come out the way I had ever written, like the way I wrote the songs and the way I heard them when I'd play them in my sitting on the end of my bed or wherever I was. By the time it went through the process of the band, and the songs didn't change, the structures were like, the riffs never changed or anything, but everyone's elements, we didn't have the same visions. You had some people in the band that wanted us to sound like AC/DC and who wanted to play like AC/DC or the Who, and you had some people that were more into just I don't even know what some of them were into, you know. And like, our first bass player was awesome, but he was really into like he played a big stand-up bass, so all of a sudden, like everyone thought we were rockabilly, and it's like we don't even fucking sound like rockabilly. Like it's like, but you have this big upright bass making that slapping sound, and it changes the dynamics, and so it didn't matter what I wrote. Like and like our first drummer was into metal and hard rock, and like it was, it just you know, it was like, and again, it was a great band, and I learned so much, and we did really well, like really, really well in terms of Toronto. We did great. And in terms of Southern Ontario in general, like, you know, and like we were scouted by Joan Jett at one point, you know, we were having a really good time. We were like I'd say for 8 of those 10 years, every single venue we played in Toronto went to capacity, and like, and with people outside. So it was a really good feeling. We were touching people, you know, we had fans, we sold out all of our albums every time we, you know, do things. It was really good, but it wasn't what I wanted. And we partied really hard. We were notorious for that. Like everyone knew that about us. We went really hard. We went all night, right into the morning. And I remember without getting into the details of that, when I cleaned up, that's when I was like, I'm in the wrong band. what happened to the last decade? I'm like, this isn't what I wanted to do. And I'm looking around the room and I'm like, oh, fuck. So I gave my notice. I'm like, guys, we got 1 year left and let's just end it. And like, so we wrote, I made a 1 year exit plan. I'm like, we're going to record our 3rd and final album. We're going to play these gigs. Like, you know, we'll do 3 Toronto shows and anything else in Ontario that you want, you know? And I'm like, let's just hang our hat. Let's go. Let's say goodbye. Yeah.
Wow.
And I also really quickly, I played in the Class Assassins for like 6-7 years. They were a well-established band before me, and they're still going. One of the guitar players had to walk away for a while, and he handpicked me, which was great. And that was easily the best band I've ever played in my life. The musicianship in that band was off the hook. We never sounded bad. We were never sloppy. It was just like so tight, and to play in a band that you were a fan of is just even more fun.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm like on stage playing guitar, but I'm rocking out because I have the best seat in the house, you know? And like, so that was like, you know, that was just phenomenal. Playing with those guys was great. Whiskey Hearts, I did that for a while. I played in a band called Plan 37. Dogs. There's another band that I play in called Dogs, and like basically we'd play like 2 gigs a year. And yeah, I've gotten around.
That's
so
right.
I'm pretty proud of my resume.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and it's humbling too, because like almost all the bands I've played in are long forgotten. Like, and I'm okay with it. It's cool, you know, like it's just one of those things, like, you know, while we were around, we were doing well, but like, you know, people just forget about you pretty fast. So it's kind of funny. It's an eye opener every now and then when like you'll go online and you'll see like people making lists of their favorite Toronto punk bands, and I'll just like, I don't even look at them. I can't even look at that shit because I'm like, no one remembers.
Come on. Yeah.
No one remembers any band I played in.
Yeah.
You know?
So another thing I've noticed throughout your work, and again, I'm thinking there's maybe a theme, but maybe not. There's quite a nautical theme that I find in your music. Obviously, Sinking Ships, your song Shipwrecked. There seems to be a theme there. Is that something that, you know, inspires you, or that the thought of that kind of thing inspires you, and that's just where it came from?
Yeah. You know, my family's from Malta. Malta is like a rock in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
And you know, my grandfather worked on ships, you know, and like well, one of them did anyways. And yeah, I mean, and I mean, Sinking Ships was actually a song I wrote as a solo artist. I wrote a song called Sinking Ships in like '99, and just recorded on my 4-track, and like we used to just have it like it was on my demo and stuff. And then when I started the band Sinking Ships and we needed a name, we were like, the original three members of the band, Naomi, Mark, and myself, were like tossing names around. And I had this list of paper, and I wrote all these things, and they were all my name submissions were all wrestling moves. They were all like because I'm a big professional wrestling
pile
fan.
driver.
Exactly, dude. DDT and pile driver and suplex and forearm smash and just whatever, like, right. And then at the bottom, I picked up one of my demos once and I wrote down a bunch of names of songs from my demo just to beef it up so it wasn't all wrestling.
Right.
And I put like Sinking Ships, Garbage Island, and like some other ones like Rhythm and the Rebel. And I put all these song names that I've written, and then everyone just freaked out for Sinking Ships and wanted it really badly.
Right.
So so that's where that came from. Definitely. Once I did the Sailing On EP, I was like, okay, I'm done with the nautical thing. And then I wrote Shipwreck, and I'm like, oh, I can't stop.
Yeah.
So
what comes out, right?
Exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah. So my favorite work of yours, my favorite song is Summer Nights by a distance.
Thank you.
I absolutely love it. Again, a sad song that somehow makes you feel good. It's so weird. I'm not sure how to even explain it. But is there a specific story to that one, or is that just more of a general?
No, yeah, it was so Summer Nights actually was written at 2 points. I wrote the first verse and the chorus and played it like that for a year or two, and then shelved it, and then like 5 years later wrote the second verse without even realizing that I was writing a song that was identical to Summer Nights. And then I just had this epiphany, or I just had this moment, and I was like, oh fuck, I can put that as the second verse. And I'm like, yeah. But the song is it's as true as can be. Like, and again, this goes back to like the partying lifestyle and the excess and all of that. And when I wrote the first verse, it was at the very beginning of my party stage and my staying up all night and not really sleeping and not taking care of myself, just living that whole lifestyle. And then when I wrote the second verse, I was right deep into it. I was like this deep into it. And that's when I wrote the second verse and put it together. And so I mean, I love that song too. I get a lot of feedback about that track. It seems to have touched a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So there's a live video of you on YouTube performing that song, and it ends pretty much after the first verse. So would that have been before you came up with the second verse?
It very well might be. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's wild. Because I found the video. I thought, oh, awesome. Live Summer Nights. Like, I've been waiting for this. And then it ends. I'm like, what the fuck just happened?
Right. There probably isn't even a harmonica in it, right?
I have to go back and watch it again, but you might be right. You might be right. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. I really like it. I'd like to record it again one day, to be honest with you. Yeah. Actually, a buddy of mine, Chris McDonald, who played in Whiskey Hearts with me and who currently is in the LeBarons, he, about once a year, he'll be like, Cactus, let's get in the studio. I want to produce it.
Oh,
and
nice.
He's like, he says he has ideas for it. And I'm like, I'm down with that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. That would be something to look forward to for sure. So sorry, go ahead.
The poppy part of it, you're absolutely right. Because every time I try to play that song with a band, I even, for a while, a couple of years ago, I had a project called The Mud, the Blood, and the Beer. And it's similar to what I'm doing now. But it was like it was like a bassist and a drummer, and they were backing me up, and we were just doing straight up Cactus songs.
Right.
And we would try doing Summer Nights. And I was always like, the last thing I want to do is get frustrated at anyone. But when you're playing songs that you've already played for like 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is, and it starts sounding off, you have to put your foot down. You're almost like, oh, stop, this is wrong.
Right.
And it was always coming out really poppy. And I was like, why the fuck does this song sound so poppy? And then we tried it again now with Public Mess, and it kept on coming across poppy. And then finally realized, I'm like, okay, it's a pop song in a sense, but because it's just guitar and vocals, it's raw enough that the vocals and the poppiness of the music are like balanced, and they're always wrestling with each other. So it creates something. But when you have the whole band emphasizing what's obviously the more popular end of the music, it just overpowers it.
Right.
Right. So I'm like, maybe it's not meant to be, or else the band has to think outside of the box with whatever they choose to play.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before the two verses, the time between them, where you were in your life with each of those verses, and it's apparent that the second verse is much more, let's say, angry than the first verse, which is kind of more melancholy, I would say. So do those two verses sort of go to where you were in your head at those two separate times in your life?
Exactly. Yes. Good call. Yeah. I was angry and dark, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the first verse is, like I said, a little more melancholy, and then the second verse is like, wow, that's
the first verse is a little more observant, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm kind of like I'm noticing, right? And then the second verse is like, holy fuck, I'm in it now. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But terrific piece. That's, like I said, my favorite by a distance, and that's saying something because of how much I, love some of the other stuff as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the acoustic guitar obviously is your thing. So when did you start playing? How old were you? And what draws you to the acoustic sound?
I started playing as young as I can remember. One of my first Christmases that I can recall as a child was getting is it here? No, it's not here. It's at my cottage. Getting like a little acoustic guitar, like a real one, but very small.
Right.
And growing up, there was always a electric guitar in my house. There was like a big hollow body Japanese Gibson knockoff. And
who played that?
Well, okay, so my dad bought it for my brother. My brother is 7 years older than me, and my dad bought it for my brother for him to take guitar lessons, and he never got into the guitar lessons. He didn't dig it. So the guitar just stayed in my parents' room, and my dad would strum it periodically.
Right.
Every now and then, it would be like the evening, I'd be laying in bed, and I'd hear him, and he was self-taught. My dad was totally self-taught. And he would play in a Johnny Cash / Stompin' Tom Connor style. And that's the best way I can put it. Like a lot of that Johnny Cash picking stuff, like the style you hear on Walk the Line, doing a lot of that, and making up some songs and singing some Stompin' Tom songs and some Johnny Cash songs. So music was always in the house. Saw my dad playing, thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I would try to play his guitar. I didn't know what I was doing. Then they bought me that guitar, and then eventually, I was 12, getting into heavy metal and hard rock, and they bought me a guitar for Christmas, like a Gibson knockoff again, from Sears, and I played the fuck out of that. But like, okay, here's the thing, like. And my dad's no longer with us, and I love my parents dearly, but like they handed me a guitar, but no lessons, no book, no tuner.
Here you go.
I didn't, and it was like, but that was the '80s for you. Here, go in your room now, right? And so I've sat in my room and tried to play along, but I didn't even know how to tune it. I didn't, again, no internet, nothing. I didn't know anything, so like. I remember getting some money about a year or so later and going to the music store and buying the book, buying like an AC/DC song book. I think it was like Back in Black tablature, and then maybe buying Appetite for Destruction eventually, and like a Metallica one, and seeing this picture of a power chord, going, okay, I can do that, and then hitting it, and it sounded like shit because I wasn't in tune. So like, the day I discovered how to tune.
Changed your life.
Yeah, right. There was a guy there was a guy that worked at a bakery. His family owned a bakery down the street from where I grew up, and there was like an older teenager, and he worked the night shift, and he had to bake bread and all that stuff all night long before the family would open back up in the morning. And I became friends with him because he would always be outside smoking. He had long hair, and I thought he was cool, and I had long hair. And I'd go and sit with him while he smoked. And then one day he's like, "Do you want to come in? I have a guitar." And I went in there, and he had this really nice BC Rich and a little PV amp, and he had a pile of songbooks. And he's like, "Here, kid, play." And I remember I can remember clear as day, picking up the guitar, playing a chord, and I'm like, "Holy shit, it's in tune. This sounds amazing." And he had like distortion and reverb. And I opened up an Ozzy Osbourne songbook and started teaching myself how to play Crazy Train right in front of him. And he was blown away. and so that was like a game changer for me. And then one of my uncles gave me an acoustic guitar, and then I started realizing that it was a lot of fun to write on acoustic and then apply it to electric and vice versa. And so I just started doing that, and the acoustic went with me everywhere. I would take it with me to school and just play on my lunch break, and I took it everywhere. I was like always walking around with an acoustic guitar for probably from the age of 16 to 19, just walking around everywhere I went with an acoustic guitar.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So who would you say then was your first musical love? There's always that one that you remember.
Well, different time periods, but like Guns N' Roses, when I was like 13 years old, were the ones that like really hit me hard. Like just the whole attitude of it, the whole punk rockness of it.
Yeah.
The whole, like, even though they're not a punk band, but there was like just something different about them than anyone else that was on much music at that time. Right. Guns N' Roses were the first one that inspired me. I remember taking my denim jacket and cutting the sleeves off because I saw a video of Slash wearing a denim jacket over a leather jacket, which is like commonplace, right? Within the biker community, or like even with punk rock for the last 15 years, right? But I did that, and my mom freaked the fuck out, right? But like, so Guns N' Roses, and then because of bands like Guns N' Roses and Metallica, that helped me discover punk rock,
right?
Because they were covering punk bands, they were wearing Misfits t-shirts and things like that in their photos, and I had a buddy, Jason, who plays in Summer '92, and he started getting these punk rock bands, and then he would copy them for me, and like, so he helped expose me to that as well.
That's great.
And then some of the first punk bands I loved were Bad Religion, Husker Du, and then Leatherface. The day I heard them, I don't think anyone else even came close to that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Your story is so similar to mine because I'm born in 1970, so the 80s was, and I started out, mine was Ozzy when I was 13. Bark at the Moon. That was my first.
Oh, yeah.
That was mine. And then it was on to, like, I was a huge Wasp fan for a while.
Oh, geez, yeah.
and then got into the thrash. Like, Megadeth is still one of my favorite bands. Yep. And then, like you said, through those bands, and like half of them are wearing Ramones t-shirts. So it's like, I got to check out who the hell these guys are.
Yeah, and Megadeth covering Anarchy in the UK. Did that make you curious?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So so I totally get, like, your story is the same as mine, and my first punk album was Dead Kennedys, Give Me Convenience or Give Me Death, which is a classic, of course. But what really got me into punk, I remember it was 1987. I went to Germany to visit my brother, who was stationed there in the military.
Right.
And they had a library on the base, and you could check out vinyl.
Oh, wow.
And so I remember I checked out 3 albums, never mind the Bollocks, which in my mind, again, just my opinion, the best punk rock album ever. So there was that one. There was Exploited, Troops of Tomorrow, and SNFU, who is still one of my favorite punk bands. And that, sort of, that kicked it all off, and then it just went from there for me. But, one of the first things that I wanted to do when I started collecting vinyl again was get by those 3 albums. And
Nice.
I finally, in a record store in North Bay of all places, I found the Exploited album. That was the last one I was waiting on. So it's just funny how like you remember these stories about, like you said, where you were when you heard this album for the first time and what it means to you still. And there's not much else that can do that to you like music can.
No, exactly, right? Yeah. What was the SNFU album?
And someone no one else wanted to play.
Yeah.
Which, incredible.
Oh man, the first SNFU song I heard was in the parking lot of the plaza by my school, and oddly enough, was their cover of Cat Stevens.
Oh, isn't that fantastic?
It's so good.
Oh,
to this
my
day,
God.
It gives me goosebumps, and I can remember like 15-year-old me, all dorky and everything, but like loving it. Right?
Yeah.
So good.
And now the chai is gone. It
Yes.
hits even differently, right? Like
that's right.
Takes on a whole different meaning. Yeah. But that band is so talented and underrated. Like some of the songs, Ashes is one of my favorite. It's one of later on, but it's my favorite song. Painful Reminder. Like, you just can't beat that catalog.
I met Chai a few times. I don't have any great Chai stories. We never clicked. Not in a bad way, but like I have friends that like just love him and just like talk about like instantly becoming friends with him. And I met him a few times. I even opened up for him a few years before he passed away. And like he was really cool and everything, but like just I don't have any great connection with him, but he was fantastic.
Oh yeah. What a unique character in music completely. Yeah. So that's my sort of story about what got me into punk rock and so on. So
I love it. That's a great one.
Yeah. It's often so random, and like finding you was random for me. I was looking for music for my radio show, and just on Bandcamp, and going through the categories just kind of randomly, and here we are. Is
that how you found me?
Yeah.
And when you were searching for music on Bandcamp, like I showed up as one of the options.
Yeah,
right, that's cool.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, again, it's the name Cactus. Oh, that's a cool name. Like, what's this about? And then you play that first song. I can't remember what the first song I heard was, but obviously it stuck with me. So
nice.
It's just a lot of it is so random how you discover something that you end up loving.
Oh, totally, right? Totally. Oh man, back in those early days of Napster, that was a game changer too.
Oh,
like I was broke. I was really broke at that point, and I wasn't buying as many records as I had been used to previously, and that was an awesome opportunity for me to start discovering music. And I remember like I tried to play nice. So I'd download the shit out of everything. And then the ones that resonated with me, I would go buy. I remember like, grabbing as much, against me. They only had a couple of EPs and the first LP out at that point, but I remember downloading it all and loving it, and then going and see them play like 4 months later and buying everything from the merch table. And like, just a lot of bands like that. I had already discovered, who else? There was a lot of bands I got into through that, like Small Brown Bike, and just like a lot of those kind of bands at that point in time.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank, unfortunately, but yeah.
You're definitely right though about discovering music that way. Just this looks like I could.
It was really easy.
It
was a game changer. Unfortunately, it was obviously like it was unregulated and it was wrong to mainstream artists were obviously fucking opposed to it, right? But like it really did a lot for the punk rock community because it helped a lot of us find each other that way.
It's like a more modern version of tape trading, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. And like, the difference exactly. And the thing too is like, okay, so I could see where the majors hated it because like, okay, so yeah, you go and download a bunch of Metallica albums and then they come to town later that year and maybe you're like, fuck it, I'm not paying $100 to go see them. But you downloaded a whole bunch of punk rock shit and then they came to town and they were playing for $5 or $10 or maybe $20, whatever, if they were on Epitaph or something, right? And you still went because you could afford it. So
Right.
like the punk rock community benefited from it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
definitely.
very good point. A totally different perspective on that issue, depending on where
Mhm.
you are in the on the ladder, so to speak.
Yeah,
So yeah, so against me, you mentioned them. What a terrific band that is.
so good, right?
Yeah,
So good.
they're incredible and such a story. Like with what they've been through as a band and what Laura Jane Grace has been through, in her life. Like
Yeah,
what a story, what a impetus to write those songs too. Like you can feel the emotion in every one of their songs.
100%. And I think they have a discography that they can be like so fucking proud of. Like I remember in the early days seeing and hearing a lot of people complain like, oh, they don't sound like they used to. But like that's just been they've been consistent at not sounding like the last album. So
Right.
like if you don't get it by now, then you're just like like you're listening wrong because
Yeah, yeah.
like
Right.
no two albums have ever sounded alike, and that's what's been great. It's very similar to the Clash in that
Mhm.
sense. Like they're not doing the same album twice, and they
Right.
don't have to. They've proven that like even right up and like, every Against Me album is good. Like
Oh
every
yeah.
single one of them is good, and that's one band that my wife and I both like collect.
Mhm.
Where it's like like we have like you can see I have a pretty good record collection there, right?
Yep.
And like there's a lot of where it's just one or two albums by certain bands, but with Against Me, they're one of the bands where we have the whole thing because it's like it's that fucking good, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I was gonna say when you were mentioning about, how they don't sound alike from one album to the next, I was gonna say they're almost like the Bob Dylan of punk. Like
yeah, yeah,
he had his acoustic folky, and then he went electric, and then he released a country album and a gospel album. It's like you said, if this surprises you, then you haven't been really paying attention,
yep,
to what they're doing.
exactly. There's some bands that don't subscribe to that, and it works for them. Like like I think I can speak for a lot of people when I say like I'm very glad the first four Ramones albums all sounded like the first Ramones album because that was the right
Right,
thing to do, or or that Johnny Cash sounded the same right through till the '60s practically, and then
right.
like there's certain artists that should do what they do,
Mhm.
you know. Bad Religion, I always look at I kind of look at them like trilogies now. After all these years, I look at like, are you a Bad Religion fan?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I always look at like skip over the very, very first stuff in the '80s, but like I look at Suffer, No Control, and Against the Grain as a trilogy,
Right.
and then I look at Generator. I might be missing one. Stranger Than Fiction, and I don't remember what the other one would be, as a trilogy. And
Right.
then and I dig all those, and then after that, I'm really I kind of get lost on them a little bit,
Right.
but yeah, like Suffer, No Control, and Against the Grain, like that's just like those albums are untouchable,
Mhm.
untouchable. They're so good.
Yeah, for sure. And against me, like like you said, there's so much variety there. You'll get a song like Rapid Decompression, which is like heavy as hell, and then you'll get a song like Ache with Me, which is like the complete opposite, but you're just blown away by both of them, right? Like
Yeah,
such range in their music.
yeah. What's the one my wife's always going? She was really touched by. I think it's Two Coffins,
Oh yeah, hmm,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
that's such a
yeah,
good one.
just fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm not going to keep you much longer. This has been great. I love talking music with you, and I really thank you for doing this. I thank you for for sending me music and keeping me updated, and I really appreciate it, and always look forward to everything that you're going to be putting out. So let everybody know where if they want to go listen to Public Mess, where can they find it?
Yeah, okay. Well, we're Public Mess. I mean, we're just getting on social now. So I mean, we have an Instagram channel set up. You can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Spotify, you can find us on Bandcamp, or you can go to Cactus Vella Music dot fuck is it CA or .com? I'm
I
sorry.
hate that.
go,
It's okay.
go to go to Cactus Vella Music on the web and it'll lead you to every single thing I've ever done.
Awesome.
So that's a good place to start. And
Yeah, and do check it all out because it's great.
yeah, and with Public Mess, if you like what you hear, please spread the word because we could use all the help we can get. And to you, Scott, thank you very much. You've been a big supporter of mine for a long time, and every time I see on Twitter that you've added me to that you're playing me, I always get pretty excited. So thank you
That's
very, very
Oh
much.
man, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure. Like I said, it's one of those happenstances where you discover something just randomly and it's, becomes one of your favorite things. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's great. Well, Cactus Vella, once again, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And we'll talk again.
All right. Cheers.
All right. Cheers, man.
Bye.
Bye.